I'm Jeremy Alcorn. To give you a little bit of background about myself, I have a master's degree in social work, clinical specialization, completed in 2004. So I've been doing this for about 17 years. When I was in my master's degree, one of the professors that I had, Dr. Don Collins, he taught us something really important, and that is how we define a problem makes a really big difference in terms of what your solutions are. And today, I think we've done a lot in terms of helping to reduce stigma for mental health, and that's been very, very important. We need to be in a place in which it's okay to struggle. And at the same time, we've defined the problem as mental illness. And that's something that actually I don't really agree with. Most of the time, I don't believe that mental illness is the problem. It's actually an effect. That is to say, something has caused this concern, and whether it's depression, whether it's anxiety, that something has been at the root of this. So while we've destigmatized mental illness at the same period of time, the amount of mental illness in our society has exponentially grown. And that's a big concern for me. So what I want to present today is a different way of defining the problem and how that may lead to some answers towards us finding wellness. In the history of mental health, it actually has a very, very dark history. When you look back at institutions and a variety of things that occurred historically, and there's a reason why people would not be willing to say that they were struggling or to seek help. Then some important things happened. In the 1970s, there was some really much better antipsychotic medicines that were developed, atypical antipsychotics. And they just had a much better effect on people that were struggling with severe mental illness, such as schizophrenia. And then in 1989, Prozac was developed in this new class of antidepressants. And once again, they had a tremendously better impact. And so one of the things that happened with this is then the medical community really pushed a specific way of understanding mental illness, a way of defining the problem. And that was that mental illness is a chemical imbalance. And while this helped to maybe destigmatize that, hey, this isn't your fault that you're experiencing these problems, what it did is it took away the power from people to have influence over their life, to be able to create wellness. What do I do about having a chemical imbalance other than take a drug? While drugs can be very helpful, and my message is not to stop taking medication, it's about understanding that biochemically we change through everything that we do, whether that is having a delicious meal, or whether it's going and connecting with your family, or playing hockey and having a sense of community with a sports team. Every single one of those things actually influences you biochemically. So identifying or understanding this as a biochemical problem hasn't really been helpful. If the cure was biochemical and the cure was drugs, then we wouldn't see so many people struggling. The amount of mental illness in Canada and across the world has actually tremendously grown. When I was in my youth, there was about 1 in 5 individuals that struggled with mental illness. And at this point in time in Canada, by age 40, 50% of our population experiences mental illness. In fact, there's a study that was performed from 1990 to 2017, and this was the Global Burden of Disease study, and they found a 49% increase in the amounts of depression. And so that position around this is a genetic condition, if that was true, then it would take thousands of years of mutation for the prevalence to have changed that much. The idea that this is a genetic condition has been overstated. If I could make a comparison, not all mental illness is the same. So if you consider schizophrenia, which is one of the most severe mental illnesses, 1% of the population has schizophrenia. And that's been true my whole life. At the same time, there's been an increase of about 50% in the prevalence of depression. You can start to tease this out a little bit and to recognize that the idea that this is simply a chemical imbalance is an oversimplification. One of the very influential professionals in my development as a clinician is Dr. David Burns, and I have a quote from him that really struck home for me. He says, "Early in my career, I was a biological psychiatrist. I was working from the position that depression was a chemical imbalance. There were only two problems. One was that the people were not getting better. I was giving out medications by the bucketful, and while some people improved, most did not. The other was that our research did not support the idea that depression is caused by a chemical imbalance. In fact, it suggested that this was likely not the case." Dr. Burns was given a grant to develop a brain research center. He gave the money back, saying that he was not willing to spend his life in an effort that would not bear fruit. So Dr. Burns actually spent his life developing cognitive therapy techniques and really was foundational in shifting to some non-biological interventions that have been very effective for treating mental health conditions. If I'm not defining the problem as a chemical imbalance, but rather that the chemicals are generally unbalanced as an effect rather than as the cause, then what are we talking about? What are we talking about in terms of mental health? What is it? This gets a little bit philosophical, but I think it's very important in terms of being able to understand how we develop as a person, how we develop towards wellness. This information is from Dr. Daniel Siegel, who is a psychiatrist, and he developed an understanding or a way of working with people. It's called interpersonal neurobiology. Dr. Siegel redefines what the human mind is. So the book that this comes from is called The Developing Mind. And what Dr. Siegel suggests is that your mind isn't simply your brain, that your mind is an entity that continues to develop throughout your life and that functions to help move information. And that information moves as energy. He suggests that there's 3 different places that your mind resides, and one of them is inside you. So if you think about human anatomy and you think about the human nervous system, human nerves don't touch each other. They have a space in between them, and they communicate with each other through biochemical electricity. We talk about neurotransmitters. This is the reason why something like Prozac can help someone, is because it functions on that connection in between the nerves. And so part of our mind resides within those connections. Now, the interesting thing is that your guts actually make as much serotonin as your brain does. And so this idea that my mind is my brain, well, even inside your skin, actually your mind is connected through your whole body. This is why people say, I got this gut feeling, because it's an emotion center, and this is part of where your mind resides. There's also a large collection of neurons that are around your heart. This is why people say things like, I felt like an elephant was sitting on my chest. I heard about what happened and I was crushed. I had a pit in my stomach. It's because these directly impact your body. This is a part of your mental health function. So while cognition is important, also your emotional connections that directly connect to your body are a part of that. And they literally are energy that is moving between nerves. So that's that internal part of your mind. Dr. Siegel also talks about what he calls the intra-mind. In other words, in between. This is what I call your tribe. When a little human baby is born, it can't even lift its own head. It has to have connection. Someone has to attach this child, or else it can't survive. And that child also has to attach to these people for the child to be able to survive. And so this little human being that's born has billions of connections inside of it in terms of its nervous system, the brain doesn't start making connections. It actually starts by trimming them. And how does it know how to do that? It trims the connections and forms new connections based on environmental inputs. They call this serve and return. Literally, it's energy that is flowing between people. This little baby smiles at its caregiver, and the caregiver then lights up and smiles back. And the baby then starts to kick and move around. And these interconnections that are happening between people literally wire this little human's brain. We're wired from the outside in. So as an example, a baby horse that's born can stand up and walk immediately. And a baby human can't walk for 12 months. This is because the idea of gestation is not really understood. We think of that as this is the time that a baby is in the human body. Gestation is actually 18 months, not 9 months. And that little baby needs the same kind of connection and safety in that 9 months after birth as it needs in utero. And so this part of our mind is actually in between the people that we're connected to. So what happens for this little child is that based on their experiences, then they call it procedural learning. Based on these experiences, there's a rule book that's created in this child's head and inside them. And they live by that rule book. And then these procedures that are inside them are often a large part of why they develop depression, why they develop anxiety, because something has happened in their world and they can't live by the rules, or the rules that they have inside them don't work. So I think it's important right now to stop and check in with yourself, because this can potentially be a message that you take in the wrong way. I'm not saying that it's parents' fault that your kid ends up with a depressive disorder or anxiety, or that you've had depression or anxiety. I'm not saying it's your parents' fault. What I'm saying actually is that our society has lost touch with what little human beings need to become healthy adults. They need an adult person that is going to show them how to be. Show them, how do I deal with my feelings? Show them, how is it that I integrate my experience? Is it possible for me to be myself and make mistakes and not be terribly punished for the mistakes that I make? Are you going to withdraw your love because I acted in a certain way that you see as inappropriate? What children need is unconditional love. They refer to this as attachment-based parenting. Linking this back to how does this relate to us in terms of a chemical level? We're talking about this part of the mind, as we were saying, that is the tribe. I'm part of a community, I'm part of a connection, and that connection really happening from adults to children. What we have happening is this rule book that I talked about that develops inside the person. The rules are about things such as a kid you hear cowboys don't cry, or you hear a strong person controls their feelings. Those become part of the rules that the child then, that grows into an adult, lives by. And then they have something happen in their life and they can't deal with it, and they think they're weak, or they think that there's something wrong with me. And what's really actually happening is the procedures that were built from the tribe that they were a part of are not functional. And so now they can't live by those rules. I'm breaking down. I'm a weak person. I can't handle this. When actually that's really not true. The issue isn't that you're struggling with emotions. The issue is that you didn't learn how to work with those feelings and know what they're there for and how to integrate them. So let's look at how the tribe affects people directly in the adulthood. So in addition to this, sense of procedures, protocols that we have as part of who we are, we also are a part of some kind of community. In fact, why are so many people struggling right now? In this very moment, we're working through a pandemic, and a level of disconnection that has happened has amplified the amount of illness. It just makes sense. People are well when they are connected. So give an example. I've seen lots and lots of soldiers over the years. And one of the things that became very clear in terms of who develops post-traumatic stress. Now, a lot of soldiers would have a trauma experience and it affects them, but they wouldn't develop post-traumatic stress. And one of the big predictors of this is what they call top cover. So that is the people above me, my chain of command. Did they have my back? Could I trust them? Could I go to them? If something is wrong, would they be there for me? And if the answer is no, then those individuals are so much more likely of developing post-traumatic stress. The same becomes true of things such as anxiety, depression. That is, can I feel secure? Am I dealing with this alone? Do I have support? Are there people that understand me? And if the answer is no, then someone is going to struggle significantly and find a hard time finding wellness. People don't get through life alone. Mental health does not just live inside you, it lives in your connections. There's one more part of connection that you have that's part of your mind, and that is a connection to the physical earth. We look at this as energy and information. Why is it that people seek out the ocean? Why do they seek out mountains? And why do they seek out forests and rivers? Because literally we exchange energy with our environment. It's energizing for us to walk through a forest, and the scent of pine or the other terpenes that are pushed out by the plants literally communicate with our body. It is this energy and information that is exchanged. We're held to the earth by gravity, which is energy. And it literally grounds us. So being in a place in which you routinely are doing something like going for a walk or fishing or going to the river, whatever way it is that you connect, especially in times of disconnection or in times in which you're trying to regulate yourself, you have a problem, there's no solution, you can't fix it, then sometimes connecting to the earth, going for a walk, doing something that reconnects you to that grounded position with the earth can make a very big difference in your wellness. One of the things that occurred to me along the way, and part of my learning and part of being able to understand how do we work with individuals and how do we help people to create wellness, I had the chance to train with Dr. Scott Miller. So Miller and Duncan did a 40-year meta-analysis of data, and they found out some very important things about outcomes in mental health care. Dr. Miller presented this model that they had come up with. But what they found is that individuals seek mental health care and they are assessed, they receive a diagnosis, then they're given specific treatment that is connected to that specific diagnosis, and then they don't get better, they don't resolve their concern. What happens is then there's a new assessment, new diagnosis, and then they get a prescriptive treatment once again, but that treatment doesn't seem to help and it goes back to a new diagnosis again. So around and around we go without the person receiving the care that would help them to get better. And so it's super clear that it's not diagnosis that guides the outcome. Some of the things they found in this meta-analysis, they called it no more bells and whistles, because one of the things they found is that the technique that is used in the counseling process accounts for about 15% of the change. Placebo also accounts for about 15% of the change. And then when you look at the rest of the change model, 30% is actually the connection that is made with the therapist. 40% is stuff that happens in your life that has nothing to do with what is going on in therapy. And so when we look at this and we go, therapy really does work, but this position around we need to have this very prescribed idea of what treatment is doesn't actually seem to work so well. I think if we can come back to the start and understand what we're doing here is trying to redefine the problem, to find answers for yourself that's not just about a chemical imbalance, but that is about what I can do about my life and take that empowered position to find your wellness. And I think the first part is really recognizing my wellness lives in my connections. So if I understand that, and I understand that my connections in my early life were really a big part of influencing who I am, then really recognizing that I built a rule book through my experiences. And if I could start to understand that, I could start to understand what are my rules? What are these procedures that are inside me that guide who I am? Because maybe some of them are garbage. And that's really important to know. It's really important to know, wait a minute, I'm really holding myself to account here that's way higher than is reasonable. And if I could understand that the rule is garbage, then I can allow myself to throw it away. To say this rule doesn't work for me. And now I don't need to deal with the racing thoughts that are happening for me because this rule doesn't apply. And I could start to see, how do I create a new rule that's functional for myself? Another aspect of this is then to recognize that I can't get through life alone, that my mind isn't just inside me, it's also a part of my connections to other people. So then what do my connections look like with other people? And are there times in which I need to set different boundaries, in which I recognize that actually this connection that's happening is toxic for me, and I need to make some changes because I need to be just as important as everybody else. And potentially I start to make some changes or even let go of the connections that I can't heal. And it means that I also start to build and invite the connections into my life that I need. That I recognize that no one else is perfect either. So I got to cut them a break, and I also need to cut myself a break. I think a really good example of being able to recognize how boundaries work and how these connections work is using some specific emotions that are very important and rather uncomfortable. People often see that there's good feelings and bad feelings. There's no such thing as good feelings or bad feelings. There's just feelings. It's like saying that there's good colors and bad colors. Without all the colors, you don't get to make life. You don't get to paint the amazing picture that is life. And so the same is true of our feelings. And I think an example of this is anger and shame. So anger and shame are kind of like a coin. You can't just put one side of a coin in your pocket. Both sides come with it. And anger, in its functional part, is trying to set a boundary. And so we talk about if I've got these situations in my life in which there's something that is unhealthy in this connection, anger actually can tell you that. Anger can tell you something's wrong, and it's actually trying to motivate you to try to do something about it. And if you leave it, and if you ignore it, and you push it away, then the likelihood is it's going to get really loud until you do or say things that you're going to regret. And so this starts to become a way in which you can understand, how do I work with myself? How do I recognize that I need to make some kind of change or what the change is? And anger will help you to know that. And you can start to go, what is it telling me? What is it that I don't like? What boundary is being broken here? And use curiosity to be able to better understand that. And then you may be able to work with that other person, that other party that has broken that boundary in a way that is more respectful. And perhaps you can resolve it. And if it's something that's not resolvable, then maybe that takes you to a different decision making about what do I need to do to be healthy for myself. Now, the other side of that coin is shame. Shame is the boundary of yourself. That is you trying to prevent yourself from breaking the rules that you have. And so shame can alert you that you've done something that isn't okay. It's trying to motivate you. You need to do something to try to repair what has happened. And so once again, if you can work with that shame, then it can help you in the context of those connections that you have in your life and alert you to, is this something I need to fix? In the case that you got a rule that is garbage, that is causing the shame, then that's about working with yourself and recognizing this rule doesn't work, it's garbage, I can't keep this rule. So I think something that really connects to what we're talking about right now is some work that was done by Gordon Neufeld and Gabor Mate. The book is called Hold On to Your Kids. And some of the information that I'll share with you now is from that. And some of it is from my experience in terms of working with the military and understanding some of those things. So if you think about this, and popular culture didn't exist before 1950. 1950 is this explosion of popular culture and a time in which people really began to connect to their peers rather than their parents. This would be the boomer generation. In their history, their fathers, or very many of them, all went away to war and they all came back injured. Whether you could see those injuries or not, the trauma that happens within the context of war is intense. One of the effects that trauma has is it's disconnecting. So individuals that have had significant trauma have difficult times having proper attached, connected relationships. And so then we look at this from a big system perspective, and you had all these dads that came back injured and that had difficulty in truly connecting and attuning with their children and potentially their wives as well. It means that it left an attachment gap or void. And moms in these situations who may not have had their emotional needs met by their husbands would find a place for that to happen, and that might be with their children, which really isn't healthy. But also the fathers would have been less available emotionally, less connected, and these kids then attached to their peers and had a counterculture. In the 1950s, this really big counterculture that was about youth culture. But every generation after that has done the same thing. In the 1960s, you didn't see the kids connecting to their parents. You saw them pushing away from what they saw as their parents' values. Culture and values are supposed to be disseminated from adults to children. This is where children are supposed to learn how to regulate and learn how to be. And so we can see this whole system of people who have not experienced that appropriate attachment experience that would have led them to know how to deal with their feelings, how to regulate themselves. I remember I had a conversation recently with my dad, who's 83 years old, and he said to me, I didn't even know if my dad loved me. And it wasn't that there was any neglect, it wasn't that there was any abuse, it was that there wasn't a sense of connection. And he didn't turn to his dad, he turned to his friends. Think about this. This is where power comes from. Power comes from relationship. And what happens to our children? We have these teens and they're struggling. And a lot of them are struggling. Who are they going to go to? Are they going to go to mom and dad, who they are afraid of being punished or in trouble? Or are they going to go to their friends that they feel like are not going to judge them? I just mentioned that power is important. And it's become a bit of a dirty word because we think of it as a position of control. And that's not what I'm talking about at all. Power is very important. Force doesn't work. Power comes from a position in which people feel safe. They feel secure. Through that, then, our relationships give us power to influence those people that are in our lives. Real power comes when a child turns towards you. And when they come to you and they say, Mom, Dad, I need help. And then you have this true influence in their life. And you're going to tell them things. You're going to say things to them. And they're going to listen. And they're going to feel secure. And they're going to come back to you again. That's real power. One of the things that I really found was very helpful in my own healing. I was 42 years old and diagnosed with attention deficit disorder. And in part of my own healing and being able to understand what happened and what happened to me. And one of the things that happened to me is that before I was ever born, my brother died. He died from sudden infant death syndrome. And my mom was in a terrible place in grief. And this was told to me many times. My dad would say, there was a mom that needed a baby to love, and there was a baby that needed love. So my sister became part of our family. She was adopted. She was from the Blackfoot Nation, an indigenous person. And as a result of this adoption, when I was born, she was like 11, and she became very, very connected to me. Remember, attachment is where we learn how to become a full adult, how we regulate, how we learn to be. And an 11-year-old kid doesn't know how to teach a little baby how to be. And so this experience for me was one of attachment competition, that my sister was someone that I turned to more than I turned to my mom or my dad. And there's no blame there. There's no one's fault in that situation. There's a variety of ways in which that properly attuned connection gets interrupted. And even times in which it is because a parent didn't know what they were doing when they were saying things like, don't you act that way, or that is not appropriate. I'll give you a reason to cry. They were just doing the best they knew how. They didn't know the difference. And so it's very important to recognize that at 42 years old, when I realized that I didn't know how to regulate myself, and that the people that were closest to me I couldn't really let into my life, that wasn't about saying somebody did something wrong or blaming somebody or going, oh, well, I'm broken, you have to accept me the way I am. It actually gave me a responsibility, not an excuse. So we touched on several things today, and I kind of want to just pull some of those things together. Looking at this and realizing the chemical imbalance theory of mental health really is an oversimplified way of understanding people. What it comes down to is, in order for us to find wellness, we really need to be able to focus on all three of those different parts of our mind. That is, we need to be able to focus on the inner part and developing a relationship with myself. We need to focus on having a sense of community, both being willing to be there for other people and allowing ourselves to be vulnerable enough for other people to be there for us. And also working on our connection with the earth and making sure that we have that sense of groundedness. I'm very grateful for the opportunity to have been able to take some time and for your willingness to listen. I want to give you one concluding message. The big picture here is you don't need to accept mental illness as your reality. In fact, the important part is to accept yourself.